Welcome to this session for WHO Health Week. We're just getting underway here, so we'll let folks enter and get settled in. It's good to see everybody today. I know it's been a very busy week for folks at the WHO hosting all these webinars. We're very excited to be featuring this one from the Faith and Food Coalition. So I'm going to get things underway. My name is Andrew Schwartz, and I work at the Center for Earth Ethics. It's my pleasure to be the moderator for today's conversation. It's great to be here with our friends from the WHO, from UN Nutrition and the Food System Summit Secretariat, as we take this opportunity to reflect on the intersection of faith and our food systems. Every Thursday for the past 5 weeks, the Faith and Food Coalition has hosted a dialogue to contribute to the UN Food System Summit. These dialogues brought together people from around the world, across traditions and expertises, and faiths, and passions, and lived experiences to answer the question of how faith can best support the transitions, trade-offs, and solutions needed to transform our food systems to be accessible, sustainable, and equitable. Our dialogues concluded last Thursday, and so after a week of reflection, we're here to talk about what we learned and how we want to contribute, and we think faith can contribute to our food systems work that we need to do. It's a pretty full schedule, so I'm going to introduce our speakers, and I hope they'll forgive me, but for the sake of time, I'm only going to offer your names and titles, and rather than your full bios. So first off today, we have Bibi La Luz Gonzalez, founder of Eat Better Waik. We have Dr. Mariam Hussein. She's an oncology hospitalist at The Ohio State University and vice president of the Islamic Medical Association of North America. We've got Joshua Bassifin, director of climate action for the Parliament of the World's Religions. Kelly Moulton is convener for the Interfaith Public Health Network. Steve Chu, representative to the UN for the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation. Sinek Onuma for UN Nutrition Secretariat, Executive Secretary. God, there's a lot of in there. We've got Almemi Diagna, co-founder of Smart System Services. Dr. Maria Nira, director of the Department of Public Health and Environment at the WHO. And join us later is Dr. Martin Frick, deputy to the special envoy for the UN Food System Summit. And so with that, I also want to recognize two people who aren't on this list, but are part of the Faith and Food Coalition, and they are Chris Elisara and Gopal Patel. Thanks to both of you for everything that you've done. So today, our format for our time together will begin with reflections from members of the Faith and Food Coalition, which is a coalition of 7 different faith-based organizations representing different faiths from around the world. And then we'll open up to a fireside conversation and Q&A. So please do add in, for those of you who are attending, your name, where you're from, maybe what you're having to eat today. And then if any questions come up, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A function so that we can make sure to answer them. I want to begin with Bibi La Luz Gonzalez. She was our moderator for all the dialogues. And it's really fun now to be able to ask you some questions. And so I know before this, you didn't engage a lot with faiths. And you don't really come from a faith-based organization. But I'm curious to hear from you after these dialogues and your experience, why you think it's important for faith to engage with food systems transformation.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And it's also great to be here in these 5 minutes to speak. Thank you for being the moderator for today. And I want to thank each and every one of you. First off, Andrew, Karina, Gopal, Mariam, Kelly, Steve, Joshua, and Chris. This is something that I wanted to say last time. Thank you all for your super support. And also guiding me into knowing a bit more about what interfaith means and how we go about in our day-to-day with our professional duties, our personal ones, with that faith perspective. And with your question, Andrew, well, as you mentioned, I do believe I have faith in a higher power, but I didn't really see it as something that it was entrenched in my professional life. And getting this opportunity of moderating, for me, it was a challenge. And first thinking if I was a correct person to do so, because I was not as engaged with the interfaith or even faith perspectives within my own religion. And it was a great opportunity for me to understand and learn so much more of the things that we hold sacred. And I'm not just speaking about me, but a lot of millions, billions of people, which is religion, faith, the beliefs that we have. And it was a great opportunity to see that with what in my work I hold sacred, which is food. And that is a human right for everyone to have that nutritious food, that right to food and the nutrition aspect. So intertwining a bit more of bringing down the practical ways of what is divine, let's say, into our world. And I just found very specific words that go in line with what we are trying to do. For example, with mindsets, behavior change, creativity. I was just reading. So thanks to this, I also got into reading a book, which is about the history of God, and then really being more aware of those specific languages and words that we use on a daily basis that are written in the scriptures with whichever religion, and then how we apply it. I am just now reading a part on Islam, and this goes great with Mariam, who's my partner here in this first section. And it speaks about the nutrition aspect, the food aspect. So what are those writings that speak about the access that we have to food, which foods we hold very sacred, and are we applying them in our day-to-day? So it was a really great way to bridge that perspective, and being more open, and also aligning. What I learned a lot is how most of the religions here align to the same common goal, and it's just great for that interfaith perspective. I hope I answered your question, Andrew.
You did, and I think it was very the sacred, right? I think is something that's come up a lot, but also the way that we're asked to compartmentalize. So where does faith sit in one part of our life, and these values and what we hold sacred and dear, and then where doesn't it? And I think that's something that we engage throughout this process, is this compartmentalization of values and faiths and the sacred. And I really appreciate you raising that up. And so, yeah, now I want to move to you, Miriam. You've been part of this coalition and instrumental in bringing it together, but you're also a doctor, you're an oncologist, and you're the vice president for Amana. So just from those standpoints, I'm curious to hear from you, where you see this faith and food system intersecting, and why it's important to have a faith-based approach to these systems.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Andrew. And it's just been a pleasure to be a part of this group and to be partners with Bibi for this session. And so I guess to start off, as being a physician, right, we do like to talk, but we do like to talk to people. And so I'll share a quick story with you that when I was a second year, very inexperienced resident, learning the art, quote unquote, of medicine, I had a very difficult patient encounter. This patient in particular, his sugars were always uncontrolled. At every visit, I had to increase his insulin to literally ungodly levels. And one day I just lost it. I mean, I was professional still, but I just blurted out to him that, what are you doing? Why are your sugars so terribly controlled? I can't keep treating you like this if you're not going to take care of yourself. And he paused, looked down, took a deep breath, and then told me, Doc, I know, but what can I do? I live on a fixed income, my Social Security. I live in a trailer. My wife has been sick on and off this whole year, in and out of the hospital, and all the hospital bills. The only place I can afford food is the food pantry, and all they have is bread. What else can I do? Have you ever, or do you remember those moments where you feel so ashamed of yourself, or you wish you could shove your head into the ground like an ostrich? I have never felt more ashamed of myself than in that moment, but I was never more enlightened than what I was in that moment. And to your point, Andrew, as well, too, that it was the first time I truly understood a patient's story and the importance of their story. My patient had diabetes, yes. He had a medical condition, yes. But his disease, and more importantly, his health, was so much more than the science of his blood sugars. His health was linked to his surroundings, his environment, his struggles, his pain. As a physician, we're taught so much science, which is undeniably important. But there was only so much I could do for him with my science. His environment played a much greater role in his health than I ever could. I truly saw for the first time what food insecurity looked like, and not just what a textbook said. And so we're all here, and I'm grateful to be here too, because we all understand health. We all know the numerous studies that have confirmed the undeniable connections between healthy food and health. We had all these great dialogues showing that. We understand the concepts of social, commercial, environmental determinants of health. We've all read and seen the devastation that the COVID-19 pandemic had on the food system and the resultant astronomical levels of food insecurity worldwide. But however, once my eyes were opened after this patient encounter, I also became witness to the inequities in the healthcare system and how commercial interests drive many of our food decisions and behaviors, like Bibi had mentioned. I became witness to the sacred lands that have been stolen and ancestral indigenous practices that have been deliberately ignored for profit. But what I did anticipate learning from my patient was another dimension of health. So at the end of our visit, after profusely apologizing, he tried to reassure me, "We'll be all right," he said. "The Lord will look after me." So if social determinants are an unaddressed topic in the Western healthcare system, where I come from, God and religion are in a completely different universe. You just don't bring it up. I connect strongly with my Islamic faith, but I didn't bring it up in practice. And I wonder if maybe some of you could relate to that as well. But however, this patient of mine and the countless that have passed on to the next life, each with their own unique story of joy, hardship, they showed me how integral faith is to health. The Quran, like many of our religious texts and faith traditions, they all stress the importance of pure food. Whenever it's discussed who is a believer, not just a Muslim, but who is a believer of God, it's very frequently joined with statements about those who eat good things, pure things, and that God has provided them and who are grateful to him. And just to clarify, our current diets aren't necessarily, do not contain or promote those foods that are within all of these texts all the time. So my patient had an undeniable faith in God while living in a human created system that was designed against him. And maybe faith was the only thing that kept him going all of those years. He helped me realize that it doesn't have to be this way. We created this food system, so we can change it. All our faith traditions and what these dialogues have showed us is that what a food system could look like that is harmonious with health and our place in the environment. And by using science and faith, we can revolutionize how we produce, distribute, consume food that's healthy, equitable, and just earth conscious. So before I leave, I just want to say, so my main goal with all of this was just to, ask you all just to bring faith actors to the table. As someone who's very science focused, I'm asking you to bring faith actors to the table, because from the faith and food dialogues, we heard from someone like Denisa Livingston, who is using traditional indigenous wisdom to fight food apartheid. We heard from Najat Muhammad, who is promoting farming practices consistent with religious principles, specifically Islam, to grow healthier food to fight disease, like my patient's diabetes. So the WHO is already working with faith partners like myself on a framework for engagement with faith actors during these times of emergencies like the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I think this could be a really great precedent moving forward. Thank you again.
Thank you, Miriam, so much. Also want to say a quick thing, or welcome to Dr. Martin Frick. Good to see you. And with that, Miriam, absolutely. And I think that was one thing that really stood out to me from all the different dialogues we had, was this interconnection and a similar sort of struggle, especially with processed and ultra processed foods entering communities and markets where they weren't before, and just the rash of diabetes, the rash of these NDCs that are directly attributable to the new introduction of foods. And so looking backwards towards tradition to look at how that wisdom can play out along with the newest science and technology to overcome, I think it was something that really stood out to me. And on that note of what stood out, I'm going to transition now to Joshua Baspin and then Kelly Moulton, who are going to share a bit of the principles and the calls to action that have stood out at this point to us. And so, Josh, I'll hand it over to you. I know I need to start a slideshow, so I'm going to do some clicking and hopefully not mess it up. If I do, bear with me. But we're going to share our screen. Joshua, after you.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm really feeling all the feels from Dr. Hussein's story. Really emotional. I'm just gonna take a deep breath and just bring into this space all of the human stories that are behind that as well. So many people around the world who struggle with being able to nourish their bodies properly, just to kind of have that undergirding us. So a little bit about the kind of top level principles that came out of these 5 dialogues that we've been having over the past few weeks. So I'll start there. Next slide, please. So the first principle is people of faith are called to conversion and change for the common good. So what we mean here is that we have to reconcile our consumption and production patterns with our values. And that entails really reevaluating the impact that our food systems and we through our food systems have, not just on the environment, but also on workers who are in those food systems. Next slide. The second principle is what we call nature positivity is human positivity. And we are connected to nature. It's not something that's out there separate from us. We are part of that ecosystem. And we find it really helpful to talk about the One Health model, which illustrates how human health is integrally linked to the health of the planet. Next slide. The third principle relates to how our traditions teach us that food is holy and serves to nourish our bodies. We do live in an industrial food system, but at its core, food is not a commodity. Food is something that's holy. It's something that serves to nourish us, give us energy. It's not something to be bought and sold on world markets, even though we do live in that kind of a system. Next slide, please. So the next principle that came out of our discussions is about indigenous traditions and the wisdom that many of those traditions hold about sustainable food systems, and particularly how indigenous peoples have lived on land and grown and harvested and gathered food in a way that respects ecosystems and works with ecosystems and managed lands and waters without losing biodiversity. So it's really an integrated approach to food and ecology that I think we really can learn from. Next slide. So the next principle is about reconnecting our faith rituals with an ethical food system. So we've seen this quite a bit in the last, really the last few decades, and particularly in the last few years, where many folks in individual faith traditions are saying, my ritual is guiding me to a different way of approaching food and agriculture. And just a couple of examples of this is what folks call eco-kashrut in the Jewish tradition, which is taking the principles of the kosher laws and saying, you know what, these operate a little bit differently in the modern context than they did 1,000, 2,000 years ago. So I'm going to take the spirit of the kosher laws and integrate them into this modern context where we live in a system of industrial food that never existed thousands of years ago. So I'm going to think more about the way that we treat animals. I'm going to think more about our impact on the environment. I'm going to think more about the workers who are in that producing food in that system. Also, another one is in Ramadan, eating a vegetarian diet, because that is something that the Prophet did during Ramadan, was to switch over to a vegetarian diet. Next slide, please. Science and faith are not at odds. This is really about taking our faith values that already align with best scientific practices and appropriately manifesting them so that we are making the right decisions and aligning that science and our traditions. Next slide. Restoring degraded land and protecting ecosystems while connecting farmers to markets produces better social, economic, and ecological outcomes. So we need to break down and decommodify the industrial food system. And that is really, really challenging because it is very pervasive and it's propped up by government policy, by markets, by corporations, by branding. But one way that we can start to break down that industrial food system and create a healthier food system is to nurture alliances between farmers, governments, and businesses that are willing to help us achieve those better outcomes, where we have a holistic approach to food ecosystems, supporting farmers, connecting them to markets, and getting those better outcomes. Next slide. Finally, this last principle is resilience lies within ourselves. We don't have to look any further than the thousands of years of wisdom that our faith traditions have embedded within us. They are guiding us to make the right decisions. And we can be resilient in the face of all of the challenges that lie before us. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Joshua. So now I want to hand it over to Kelly, who's going to speak more to the actions and the calls to actions that came out of our dialogues. So Kelly, please.
Thanks, Andrew, and it's great to be here. So building off of what Joshua just shared, I just want to start with the rituals. So if we go back to the roots of our faith traditions and reimagine rituals, it can help us to change mindsets and behaviors to shift towards sustainable consumption patterns. As a Catholic who works in food systems and public health, I really appreciated Olav's comments during the second dialogue about the need and potential to see our inherent relationship to food, with food being a vessel to God, and the Eucharist reflecting the story of life in different forms. And again, Joshua mentioned the eco-kashrut. So if we look to each faith tradition's rituals, we can remember the sacredness of food and the elements that helped our food come into being. And this can bring new meaning and transformative power to faith-informed actions. Next. We also need a rights-based approach to food systems that centers community-based food systems. This is critical to build resilience in marginalized communities. Every single human being has intrinsic dignity and deserves healthy food. Food needs to be seen as a sacred human right rather than as a commodity. And faith communities can advocate for and participate in building these community-based food systems, which involves gathering resources to share food, building interconnectedness, and resisting co-option of the food system by corporations. Next. So faith communities can reclaim the narrative around the sacredness and dignity of food and the people who produce it. Corporations, through government subsidies, influence the food we eat and what is easily accessible and affordable. The spiritual values that uphold the sacredness and dignity of food and people are disregarded through the ubiquity of ultra-processed foods and barriers to traditional foodways, which contributes to nutritional trauma, nutrition insecurity, and diet-related diseases that have also contributed to higher mortality rates during the COVID-19 pandemic. Food apartheid has existed ever since the food system was colonized, and we need to decolonize the food system. We need to push food producers to understand that food produced only for profit that exploits people and land can no longer be an option. And food producers must prioritize worker justice and ending practices that disassociate people from the land. Next slide. So we also need to look towards innovative solutions that have been developed by Indigenous and faith communities. So there's the Dene junk food tax, which is a tax on junk foods within the Indigenous community of Navajo Nation. There's a Buddhist hospital in Taiwan, which serves plant-based meals to its patients, and agricultural practices that are used and taught by Indigenous and Jewish communities that honor people, nutrition, and land. The Black Church Food Security Network, a Christian network in the United States that leverages resources that are readily available in the community, is transforming vacant, underutilized land in community gardens, transforming underutilized community spaces into mini farmers markets by bringing Black food producers and entrepreneurs so they can sell their products directly to the community, and running a Black church-supported agriculture program that leverages economies of scale to buy produce in bulk and sell it to churches that have food distribution programs and food ministries. These are examples of solutions that honor human and environmental health, as well as food sovereignty. Next. So religious institutions that have significant land ownership, such as the Catholic Church, can make meaningful contributions to by transitioning land holdings to more agroecological purposes. If faith communities remember that people were meant to live in harmony with the land and also reimagine sacred eating to be about consuming foods that honor dignity of the workers and protect the environment, they can put these values into practice and grow food, thereby contributing directly towards the creation of holistic food systems. This could also strengthen relationships between farmers and consumers and help build more transparency in the food system. Next. So again, as Joshua mentioned, we need alliances. We need more alliances between farmers, businesses, NGOs, governments, Indigenous communities, and faith groups. And faith institutions should be at the table with the global food system stakeholders. These alliances can identify and work on issues that bring people together rather than drive us apart, thereby helping us to address both the social and the commercial determinants of health. These can also help us prevent deforestation and degradation in a globalized system. Next. And lastly, we need to support place-based, culturally and ecologically appropriate food growing that empowers local growers and women to provide for themselves and their communities. Some ways of providing this support are through policy, innovation, educational, and business opportunities, uplifting traditional agriculture and research, and breaking down customs that disempower and exploit women's labor. These solutions can also help to even out systemic imbalances that disempower smallholder farmers, workers, and women. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Andrew.
Cool. Thank you so much, Kelly and Joshua. Really appreciate you laying it out like that. And now I want to hand it over to Mr. Steve Chu, because part of this coalition, and just kind of set the stage, was that we wanted to contribute to these dialogues. We wanted to contribute to the food systems, but we also want to build through this effort a platform that would extend beyond. And so, and to carry this work forward. And so for Steve, I just want to hand to you with the thought of how both in your work and then also working through Action Track 5, do you see this contributing to the Food System Summit, COP26, and perhaps a little bit more than that?
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. Hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening. Grateful to be with you all. I think in exploring what faith contributes to these systems and these processes like the UN Food System Summit, I'd like to start with this notion around how we have found an objectification and commodification of our food systems, shifting us away from healthy and nutritious food in the name of progress and profit, right? And this disconnect that we find ourselves living in is driven by this objectification, but it's also driven by this illusion of a narrative that we are separate from the food that we eat that is being produced, that we are separate from the natural world, right? So in the five dialogues, what we've seen is that these faith leaders and faith communities that are coming forth with solutions and narratives are really bringing their A game and shaping the narratives of how we can transform our relationship with nature, how we can transform our understanding of what progress, growth, and success looks like, shifting us away from that model of infinite growth, insatiability, and really coming to a narrative how we coexist with the natural world, and also what our relationship with food is. And all of this is tied in with this moral and ethical lens that we bring from different faith and spiritual communities. And I think this as I think narrative is a boon to not only the UN Food Systems Summit as we continue to look within the various action track through our different thematic areas of what the game-changing solutions and narratives are with around the world, but also to really showcase in these larger spaces what these moral and ethical lenses are, so we don't get so caught up in this idea that we want to improve our food systems and optimize them for that we're doing it for the sake of doing it rather than for the people that we do it for, right? So bringing that lens that we are truly here to serve people. So moving forward in terms of the couple of things that I've really seen come forth in our conversations, the first is we must continue to uplift these game-changing solutions and narratives that have emerged from our five dialogues. We've really scratched the surface of the wisdom and insight that the faith communities have brought to the table, and within our coalition ourselves, and then also within the larger civil society community, I hope that these solutions and narratives resonate and we can continue to amplify them so that they can be present at both the pre-summit and the summit itself. Recognizing that these narratives and solutions are being shared to us by those working on the ground, we also must honor particularly indigenous communities who are offering us so much sacred wisdom, and we must honor it in a way that does not commodify their experiences and take them out of the conversation, but take their solutions and say this works, right? But that if we are to have indigenous wisdom, that we must also ensure that in our conversations we have indigenous leaders, that we have them at the table so that there is that true representation. Continuing on with the various high-level events, I know the UN Food Systems Summit is this huge convening around food, and we're really excited that within the action tracks we're beginning to explore how our thematic areas can evolve into coalitions of actions, right? And ultimately, each and every one of these coalitions of actions, we hope, will have some faith-inspired lens or representative that can be present with them so that we can ensure that as we're having these conversations about how we transform our food systems, that a interfaith and spiritual voice is present in all of these spaces. Moving beyond the UN Food Systems Summit, also looking at COP26 and the Convention on Biological Diversity, COP, there's a lot of opportunities to continue to talk about our relationship with nature in a way that will be critical to improving our food systems. So we really will be advocating along that line. In terms of additional things that I would love to explore with both WHO and UN Nutrition, the first one is really how do we scale up? Right? Recognizing so many of these solutions are beautiful models for people around the world to implement. What resources exist and what resources can we provide, both as organizing members and also as WHO and UN Nutrition, to continue to amplify these solutions and provide resources so that communities that are vulnerable and in need of game-changing solutions have access to those ideas and models that can help improve their lives in a way that is faith and spiritual centered. The second being that we hope you will join us in continuing to support faith voices in these high level convenings and ensuring that there is adequate faith representation at these spaces. And finally, that we join in together to continue to transform our our narrative of progress, shifting us away from infinite growth, really towards that regenerative relationship we all desire in nature. And to finally close out, to build on something Josh said earlier, he was talking about ecosystems. My mic's not really good, so I heard ecosystems. And so I would implore us to also think about how we can continue to not look at how we improve our ecosystems, but transform our relationships to have healthier ecosystems. I'll close with that. I'll pass it over to you, Andrew, to see how we can better explore how the Food and Faith, or the Faith and Food Coalition, can continue to work.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm looking at time, and so I'm going to cut my little section short because I really want to get to this fireside chat and hear from our other speakers and reflections. But one question came up that I want to address right now is, will a resource containing the principles and actions be provided to all the participants? The answer is yes. So a couple takeaways that we'll get from this. One is we'll be producing an interfaith statement that's based off of what we've found and heard through these dialogues. Another will be a report. We've submitted reports through the Food System Summit process for each one of the dialogues, and we will also be creating a larger report that builds all this together, includes these principles, takeaways, calls to action. So those are two tangible things that we will be creating as a result from this. And as we look to this transition, one thing I want to flag is just this question around value, around worldview. I think one of the things that really comes to the front for me through all these dialogues is this question: what do we value and what are we working towards? We see this idea of profit, limitless growth, the bettering of the world for some and not for others. And I think this is a question where we really can engage our faith traditions, both internally, of how do our faith traditions inform the systems and structures that exist within all of our traditions, but then also how are we in conversation and more global outside of the faith, breaking down these silos to look at how we stop the industrialization of people and planet alike. And so that's one thing we've tried to create with these dialogues, was not simply just having people of faith talk to each other, because I'm guessing most of us would agree. Well, depending on who you get in the room for those conversations. But I think the important part is also creating these multilateral spaces where we get to have conversations across sector, across faith, across tradition, to really listen and learn from one another. One of our speakers really just emphasized listening not to respond, but listening to learn. And that is something that I think I've really taken away from these spaces, is the sensibility of what global solutions really need to be seen, but also at the molecular, small level, local level of how unique and distinct our solutions need to be to meet people where is culturally and traditionally appropriate. So with that, I want to transition now to you, Sneki, and really get your I'm curious how this all struck you. You know, we've had some conversations over the past couple of weeks of organizing this, and I just want to send it to you and just kind of hear how this has struck you and what kind of some of your takeaways have been.
Yes, thanks a lot. In fact, I'm still chewing on what I just heard. So I promised you yesterday or the day before that I would not come with pre-prepared, statements or whatever. So it's really trying to listen in and reflect carefully at the same time. First of all, of course, when I started thinking about this event, the food is about identity. Religion is about identity. So there comes your ecosystem, Steve. It's a beautiful quote, and sorry, you will be repeated on that quote several times. But then, the story of Dr. Mariam about that individual patient that has individual faith, but at the same time lives in this not so helpful food environment that is human-made. And that really brings us to the core of what we are working towards in this Food System Summit in September and the entire way towards it. Identity, ecosystem, people, and the Food System Summit is supposed to be people-centered. And I think that people-centeredness is really what your reflections bring to mind. So I really appreciate that. I really also appreciate how you, in your various conversations, have been thinking about equality and inequity and dignity, and that resounds me. I'm speaking as UN. So the UN has formulated human rights, right to food, right to health, and that's central to the Food System Summit as well, and that needs to be, let's say, activated. And I think the principles in combination with the actions you've been able to formulate are quite strong. Of course, I couldn't help thinking also on the word "and." I heard you saying so many beautiful things, and then I thought, and what about specific vulnerable groups? I heard you say something about pushing farmers to do X, Y, Z, but then luckily I also heard you about enabling small farmers to be able to do so. I didn't hear you so clearly speak about gender and specific roles that women undertake in order to take their role in society to feed and nourish their families, including themselves, and including also the specific needs of very small children. How do we ensure that diets are really nourishing people and that we are able to have access to such diets that nourish people throughout the life course? I didn't hear you being very specific that kids, they benefit from breast milk the first 6 months in their life, exclusive breast milk, and continued for the follow-up months until up to 2 years. You know, these specificities that are also needed and that really bring us to fulfilling human rights. So I just wanted to add on that. There was a question you asked yourself with regard to how do we bring all these beautiful ideas to scale? Healthy diets, how do we make them accessible? Because we know 3 billion people don't have access to healthy diets these days. It shouldn't be an utopia. In the UN, within UN Nutrition and our members, we are very active promoters of the concept of sustainable healthy diets. So these are diets that have been formulated at country level, so fitting in the local context, making use of local knowledge, which you highlighted very nicely with community-based knowledge, indigenous knowledge. So that all should be uptaken in the concept of sustainable healthy diets. These diets are healthy, but they should have sustainability criteria. And if we would be able to formulate these criteria, these food-based dietary guidelines in many countries, we will have a very powerful tool for policymakers, as well as producers, as well as consumers, to know what to produce, how to produce it, and what to consume, and when, and by which groups. I think that could be a tool if we would also be able, of course, to set the policies, help to improve that food environment. Mariam, you were speaking about. When I would really like to call on you as communities to make use of that space you are creating for yourselves, to try and claim a better food environment, to try and ask for better rules and regulations that protect the food environment and therefore protect these specific vulnerable groups. There's a lot of tools available out there. WHO has them on their website. FAO has them on their website. You could also browse on the UN Nutrition website. Institutional buying is another one. You could, you know, as communities, you're quite powerful. You could call for these actions in addition, or to make your own actions more specific. I think I've used my time, haven't I? I mean, I could go on a little bit more, but I don't want to take away from my colleagues on the panel to also speak. If needed, I can come back later.
Yeah, I hope so. You were building in such a good way. I was like, all right, well, I didn't want to stop you. There's too much good stuff in there, but thank you for that. And now I want to move to Almemi. You do such incredible work in terms of technology and innovation, and so I'm curious to hear your response and kind of your reaction, both from the work that you do and the focus that you have and how that interacts with many of the faith perspectives that were brought up today.
Hello everyone, I'm Almami from Mauritania. Before to start, I would like to thank all of our participants for this greetings, participation and idea. So to present myself, I'm working in the new technologies area to provide technologies for some matters in our region. So we developed a technology we named smart irrigation to allow farmers and a lot of people to do some agriculture, but to be more efficient possible. And we gave them the possibility to know which time that will be tomorrow, which in terms of information from their farms, etc. So, and my impression about this discussion, and I'm Muslim, and in our faith, it's so important to feed yourself to do correctly your 5 prayers, your 5 days prayers. So for that, I'm concerned, and all of my country, so we are concerned to get solution for this matter. And I would like to add what Stinek or Onyema said about gender. Here in our country, and that will be the right things in the Sahel region. I don't know what we'll say marriage when the rain come and the water is stuck. I mean, we'll go. So gender, girls and women come to cultivate to cultivate it. So in this area, 90% of people are working in this area are girl or women. So we have to help them or to empower them to do to be more efficient, and maybe to have more access to land, maybe to what Steve Chu said, game-changing solutions. We have to help them to get the technology. They can be more productive, and all of you knows that now in our Sahel region we are facing a lot of problems, security problems and security food problems. So we'll be able to see the things in other ways, not just to cultivate in the big lands, but to see them to cultivate in our big city and our capital. So that will be my intervention, and I would like to thank you for having, and thank you for having you. Merci.
Thank you so
I'm
much.
so nervous. Okay.
Really appreciate that reflection. And so now I want to move to Dr. Nira. You hold such an important position, and I know you're thinking about this every day. And so I'm just curious in the work that you're doing, how you, what your reaction and kind of what stood out to you, either from a particular presentation or from kind of the suite of what was presented here today.
Thank you. I have been, sorry. Apologies. No, I was confused whether you said Maria Neira or Martin, sorry.
Oh, to you, yes, please, Dr.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I got confused now. Okay, first of all, a great pleasure to be listening to you, and particularly because you are giving a kind of different touch to all of these dialogues that sometimes, because they are very scientific, we lose a little bit this human and then the face of the people that is for which we are trying to do all of this environmental protection and sustainable food systems. Just wanted to refer to a document that probably you heard about it a few months ago in the middle of the first wave of the pandemic in WHO, our team working on environmental health. We did what we call it the Manifesto for a Healthy and Green Recovery. And for us, that manifesto with 6 prescriptions, it was a kind of, I feel very comfortable with all the statements I heard from you, because it's all about common sense. It's all about the right to food is a question of considering food much more than just a commodity, as you rightly said, and the holy thing is very much related to the traditions, to the faith, to the communities. So our prescriptions were very much in that line, saying, okay, if you have one faith or you have a tradition, I'm sure that you don't want to destroy the source of all of your goods, no? The water we drink, the food we eat, or the air we breathe. And in that sense, I think it's fundamental to recover that approach of stopping our destructive, stupid, if you allow me to say it, battle with nature, I mean, on which we are definitely the losers. I think recovering that one it will be the first approach across any faith, and I don't see any religion or faith that will say you have to destroy the nature and then you will be the winner and you will be the one conquering the ecosystems. I don't recognize any, maybe I'm not an expert, definitely, but I don't recognize any religion saying, guys, destroy what is feeding you and giving you water because this is good for your, no one. So recovering that relationship with nature and starting to be more friendly on our own interest, I think it will be fantastic. And on that, if you go to the farmers and the indigenous populations, those will be the first one to say, okay, if this land is giving me tomatoes, I will not collect the tomatoes and the day after put a toxic on the land to make sure that it will not produce anything else. No one farmer or an indigenous person will do that. There are other prescriptions, I mean, 6 prescriptions that we consider that are extremely common sense, but one of them is related to the food systems. Having a sustainable food system is fundamental. And it's fundamental for everything, keeping in mind that the healthy diets, as the previous presenter was referring to, you will have all the guidelines and recommendations and things like that. But even on the healthy diets and the recommendations, is so terrible because let me share with you a terrible frustration. In a few weeks from now, we are organizing a big meeting with the SEEDS countries, you know, the small islands development states. And there is a group of them in the Pacific, particularly where obesity, as you know, is a huge, huge public health problem. But when you start to look at the causes, it takes you minutes to understand the causes of that. All the food available and cheap is processed imported food. So what is happening to our cultural approaches, to our communities in order for us to import all processed food and making it cheaper than the one produced locally? Is this good for our economy? If somebody can argue that this is for economic reasons, I'm afraid I don't buy this argument. So, and similar, I was recently, before the pandemic, of course, in Mexico City, and I tried to have some food, I mean, some fruit and something fresh for my dinner because I was very tired. I went to the supermarket. It was so easy to buy any yogurt with plenty of additives and sugar and chocolate and cereals, name it. But buying an orange, it was a kind of impossible, mission impossible. You know? So I think we need to make sure that those social determinants, the reason why people is losing their capacity to consume food that it was very much on their traditions, is sometimes very, very expensive, and it's much more expensive to buy water in certain parts of the world rather than a soda drink that you can see in all the tables of the very poor people. And to last on my last reflection with you, which I'm very, I mean, after your interventions, I think it was, I'm changing what I wanted to share with you. I had the opportunity to be at the Vatican on a meeting convened by the Vatican with all the religious leaders on climate change. And I thought it was fascinating. It was fascinating because, again, I didn't see any disagreement. I mean, there is no religion saying destroy Mother Earth or anything like that. And it was really very much about tackling the causes of climate change, about using as well the networks and the religious leaders to do something about that. But if I can make a little kind of provocative statement here, and I share it with the Vatican and the Catholics, is the Laudato Si, which is the document done by the Pope on environmental health, on climate change, is very kind of advanced and then proposing things to tackle the causes of climate change and sustainable food production, which is very good. But unfortunately, I didn't see that Laudato Si type of document at the very roots level. I mean, at the grassroots level, at the communities level. I think you have the Pope and you have very high level religious leaders from other religions, but not the little, religious leader at the community level. And that probably will require a reflection, because you know what I did once, and I stop here. I used 2 slides. I was on a presentation on climate change and health, and I put the 2 slides. One with a quote, without saying who was it, and another one. So, and I asked the participants, which one do you think is from Greenpeace, and which one do you think is from the Vatican? And everybody was wrong. Everybody thought that the most kind of advanced one was from Greenpeace, and the other one was from the Pope, and it was the other way around. So you see, I took it from the manifesto that all the religious leaders endorsed. So it's very advanced on the position on why we need to tackle climate change and why we need to make sure that we stop this destruction of ecosystems and biodiversity, but it's not getting down and getting filtrated into the low communities. So voila, this is what I wanted to share with you. And thanks for the opportunity to listen and to participate. Over.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm looking at time. Y'all, we've done a good job of filling the space. There's been some great questions, some of which we've answered in the chat, some we try to answer live. 2 that I want to raise up are just this question that I don't think we'll be able to get to, but around child mortality and how that is being addressed through this. And then how are we integrating physical health with mental, emotional, and spiritual health? These are questions that we have to get right. And we won't have time in this forum, but I will do our best to answer through the follow-up work that we do. Dr. Maria, just to your point about the small island development states, that we had a speaker on from the US Virgin Islands who said that 99% of all their food was imported. And that doesn't mean that and part of that he spoke to was because the Virgin Islands have been so colonized, 7 different flags over 200 years. And over that time, that the land, the workers were exploited to produce not for their home country, but for the colonizers. And so there's a deep antipathy amidst that population to working the land because of the historical roots and narratives that drove and created this relationship, this poor relationship between them and the land. And that his name's Lewis Peterson, Dr. Lewis Peterson is using the Rastafarian tradition to help reintegrate and reintroduce and repair that relationship, that's those spiritual roots that exist between people and the land. And I think that's part of this work, right? Is how do we heal some of these wounds that have been inflicted by the systems that have been laid upon us? And how do we change those systems so that they are not nearly as violent? And I absolutely agree with your point on kind of the up high level and then the grassroots level. I think faith has the incredible ability to organize, to inspire, but then there's also another aspect of faith that is just as divisive, that is not being helpful. And I think we need to hold that intention of what faith can do for the good and for the not as good. And I think in this space is really trying to be honest about that, but then say, how do we hold on to these root values? How do we work within and outside of our traditions to move this conversation forward in a productive, healthy way? And so with that, I want to hand it over to you, Dr. Frick, to close us out. Any reflections and last words? I'm sure everyone will understand if we go a couple of minutes over time. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I actually should be on the next panel, but this is a fantastic conversation and the next panel has to wait. Because I think what came out of these different interventions is so spot on, not only with the summit, but also with my personal views, if I may say that. And let me maybe start with Laudato Si. I've been in climate change since 2007, and for me, the wonderful thing about Laudato Si is not only that the Pope speaks out on climate change, but he actually describes the social injustice and the environmental destruction as two sides of the same coin. And that's exactly right. And now if you look at the UN is basically, and I hope nobody tweets that, not so good in doing what the UN was built for, keeping peace, avoiding conflicts, difficult. But what the UN is really focusing on for many years now, and I might say with some success, is development, which is basically lifting people out of poverty and hunger. That's one big mainstream, and fighting environmental destruction. Now, again, if we apply the same spirit that we see in Laudato Si, we can only solve one bit if we solve the other one in tandem. And coming out of the climate change process, I have for too long seen that people with best intention were driving an environmental agenda, while the rest of the world, particularly those who were colonies before, and I think what you referenced on the colonial past is so present, these old wounds, that this was perceived as if industrialized countries now first mess up the climate and then throw the burden of fixing it to developing countries. So I'm saying that because if we don't get the two things right in tandem, we will get neither of the two sides right. My first thing. The second thing is food is sitting exactly in the middle. Food is the biggest everything. It is, on the negative side, the biggest killer of biodiversity, the biggest user of water, the biggest driver of climate change, but it's also the biggest employer. And for incredible many families, it's the only hope of having a bit of an income, of having a chance for a decent life. So this brings me to the relationship of us with food, and that came out very strongly. And I loved it. Someone, I think Kelly was it, mentioned the indigenous tradition of talking about the sacredness of food. And that is something we have in all traditions. And yet we treat food like dirt, and we throw away in some places of the world up to 50%. That is just totally unacceptable. But we don't only have to fix the relationship with food, we have to fix our relationship with food producers. Because if we only throw them in a market perspective and say, well, produce what you can produce and we are buying from you, but if anyone undercuts your price, we are buying from the other person, you have a race to the bottom. We need to see that farmers are stewards of the land. Farmers are the mechanics of our ecosystem services that we have. And we have scientists who are speaking about our time as the Anthropocene, the age of man, where we are stronger influencing our natural habitat than nature does. Just one staggering fact is that men are moving more sand and gravel than nature does, in rivers and then glaciers and all of that. So I'm saying that because with all of this incredible power that people now have comes an equivalent in responsibility. And if we need to manage our planet, then we need to start with food system. This is exactly where it is. Now, I've seen in the chat box mentioning of Greta, and I take big pride that in Katowice, I was the man who introduced Greta to the Secretary General. And what the kids on the streets have done for climate is more than 10 years or 15 years of the process have done. So people can be incredibly powerful. And it's like in the fairy tale of the little boy who says, well, the emperor is naked. Sometimes it needs the direct voice of people. You say, our food system is broken. It's not working. We are not accepting this anymore. It makes us sick. It is unjust. It kills our environment. We have to change that. And this is why the summit has not only all the instruments that you would expect, action tracks and a scientific group of people who are deeply experts and know what they are doing, but we have all this system of the national dialogues and the independent dialogues to really put a little bit of, well, if I stay in food, a little bit of yeast in the dough to ferment these local discussions, because this is where the rubber hits the road. And this is where, exactly like with climate, we need kids who are actually saying, I'm not going to eat that. And if you advertise it, I'm not going to have a shake that has more calories than I should be eating in an entire day, for example. So let me stop with that, but this is super encouraging, and I hope it percolates. And I think that is what Maria said before me, down to the communities. This is where we need the action. And this is where our religious communities have still the biggest access of anyone on this planet. Back to you, Andrew. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone. We're over time, and I appreciate everyone who stuck with us and who participated in this conversation. Thank you to all our partners, the coalition. Lena, you're not on camera, but you've just been so instrumental in making this happen. I really want to thank you for doing that. Friends, this isn't the end. This is the beginning of a different kind. And I'm so looking forward to continuing engaging in this process, continue working with you in creating the change that we need to see. So with that, I want to wish everybody a good morning or afternoon or evening. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day as it is, and just really an absolute pleasure. So thank you, and hope to see you soon. All right, bye friends.